Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the 2 Plus podcast. I'm Paddy, and today we're going to be looking at another tactics video, this time looking at defensive deployment. Before we get stuck in, just a reminder, if you're liking this content, please like, comment, subscribe. It does wonders for our content being discovered and also works as great motivation for me and Alex to keep pumping out these sorts of videos. So if you like it, please get involved. But let's get stuck in. Defensive deployment for me has been very handy. I play Wood Elves, but this tactic is translatable to a lot of lists in the old world, I believe. It often helps for lists that are looking to avoid combat, or at least make sure you're in combats that you want. And there's a few key things that I think play a part in this. First off, you need to know your ranges, not just your army's ranges, but your enemy's ranges. So for your own list, you need to know in pretty good detail how far you can move, how far you can shoot, and what the disparity is between your opponent's shooting range and your shooting range. And that includes magic missiles as well as regular, shooting infantry and cav. The same goes for your enemy. If you don't know how far your opponent can charge, for example, or if they have swift stride, then you're really going to struggle to deploy properly to avoid that threat for as long as possible, or at least whittle it down before it gets to you. And that ties into the next point, which is you've got to realize what the biggest threats are. So if you are playing against a magic missile heavy list, then you need to know what spells your opponent has and what ranges they're cast at. Can you get into range to dispel it first? And if not, is it worth being that close at all? If the biggest threat is ranged shooting, then you need to figure out the distance of their range and deploy further away from it, or be within range that's worth the risk if you're in cover in a forest or something like that, where the modifiers to their shooting is so harsh that you're probably not going to take that many casualties anyway. If you're playing against a list like Beastmen, who like to just run at you, you need to know what units are charging you and when, and how far they can charge. Next up, it's also important to know what can be sacrificed. Alex, the other half of this podcast, had some wise words for me after he was crushing me in my first Wood Elves game, when he had fireballed half my army off the list on his turn one before my turn one. Said, Paddy, something always dies. In that game, the wrong things died. But most lists have something that is meant to die. So identify what those things are in your list and be willing to sacrifice them. There's a few photos coming up, which from games that I played, which you'll notice. I'll be able to point out that the chaff that I had that can distract an enemy, buy you time, and that sort of thing. All those three things lean into figuring out how you win. It's one thing to deploy at the edge of your deployment zone and just let someone run at you and stand there and shoot at them. It's probably not going to work out for the best. You need to be able to use those first 3 points to take out the biggest threats so you can start turning the table. Because someone who needs to defensively deploy needs time, generally, to turn the tables on their opponent. So I'm going to take you through a few images from a couple of battles that I had recently, and I'll show you how I defensively deployed. So this right here is the deployment from a recent tournament I played against High Elves. My Wood Elves are down here, and the High Elves are up here. So we'll go through my opponents first. He's got some Reavers here, 2 Bolt Throwers, 2 units of 10 Elven Archers, a Frostheart Phoenix, a level 4 on a horse, some Phoenix Guard, some more Reavers, and then some White Lions there. My deployment, I have a unit of Scouts, a Waystalker, some Wild Riders over there, a unit of 10 Glade Guard, Sisters of the Thorn, my Glade Rider bus with a level 2 in it, my Warhawk, Deepwood Scouts again, and then down here are some Way Watchers. So here, when I saw this setup, or when he ran through his list, I identified the threats for me. This was a favorable matchup for me because similar lists, but mine I think played a lot heavier to the direction of range and deterrence. So for me, instantly, I thought the bolt throwers, the archers, the mage were my biggest threats. So figuring out those ranges, I think they're 30-inch ranges on the elven archers. Correct me if I'm wrong there. 48 is tough on the bolt throwers, but there's things you can do to avoid them devastating you. So you can see here my deployment. I hid most of my army. The Glade Guard, if he wants to fire them, I don't even know if they're in range, but if he wants to fire bolt throwers at my Glade Guard, so be it. Know what can be sacrificed. Deepwood Scouts were hidden from the ranged threats, and I thought the mage, I'm pretty sure, had to take at least one turn to be able to get into range to fireball these guys. If he marched, he couldn't then cast fireball. So all of these units over here are protected for one turn. The Waystalkers over there, everyone, any Wood Elf players out there, people love to kill Waystalkers. This is what I learned at this tournament. I don't know if it's because they're probably the coolest models in the game, or they're just juicy toughness 3 targets, but they were a handy little bait because the tactic was to try and own this third of the board, clear the threats, and move into this half of the board, and then eventually suffocate the opponent. So keeping in mind, all of this happens before you know who goes first, which is arguably the most important part of this whole thing. If I knew I was going first, I would be able to deploy so much more aggressively because I would be able to take out some threats before he can return fire. But not knowing that means that I have to take the defensive deployment stance and take no chances. I've been burned too many times in the past, and now I just deploy as if I'm always going to lose deployment. So what my deployment here allowed me to do was, if I lost deployment, which I did, he only has a few targets to shoot at, and they're not high quality targets. He can maybe reach my Glade Guard with the bolt throwers. I did make a little mistake, and this bolt thrower here could technically see them. I don't think we played cover properly this game, but I ended up losing 2 of them there. No harm done, because the important part of my list, which is right here, remains untouched. After that first turn, I was able to move out, wipe out one of these units and a bolt thrower, and then all of a sudden half the threats are gone. This was an infantry heavy list, so once I started taking out those ranged threats, my mobility becomes the biggest factor in the game. A battle report's coming out about this game in a couple weeks, maybe, where you'll see how this unfolds, but my defensive deployment in this battle, I believe, ends up giving me the advantage by about turn 2, and it was too hard for my opponent to come back from. This was my final game of the day, and this was against Alex, who's a friend of the pod. Some of you would have seen him. Chaos Alex, we like to call him. He's playing Wolves of the Sea. So this is a very mobile list with a lot of magic missiles in it. Magic missiles are my worst enemy. It's toughness 3, no armor, just gets wiped off the board by fireballs. Thankfully, his level 4 didn't roll fireball despite having 5 spells, so I got lucky there. But he still had blue fire and Pillar of Fire, and also Ruby Ring of Ruin. So he was still a magic missile threat. I thought he was going to be more offensive than he was. He ended up playing quite defensively himself with that caster, but I couldn't take any chances. The other threat of this list is their mobility. For anyone who hasn't played Skin Wolves yet, holy crap. They're quick, they're tough. When they get into combat against weak dudes, they just wipe them. My deployment here, again, I lost deployment, which is tough for a Wood Elf list. You really want to be on the front foot with your shooting first. But this is why I deploy defensively. Again, I deployed my Waystalkers too far out. That was a mistake that I made. They quite easily could have been back here. But it ended up being not such a bad thing because it drew this unit of Skin Wolves all the way over here. All they did was take out 110-ish points of Waystalkers, and then they were too far away to re-engage the rest of the battle. So that goes to that last point again of knowing what can be sacrificed. These were one of the last units I put down. I knew that I had a pretty defensive setup here, so I dangled something out to just push a bit of the threat over here. Ideally, he sent something a bit heavier. He was too smart, to his credit, to do that, but maybe they serve their purpose. So again, you can see I've got Glade Guard at the very edge of the hill, my Glade Rider bus down here, level 4 on Warhawk, Deepwood Scouts, Sisters, Wild Riders, who I deployed a lot more defensively this time. I'm still kind of figuring out how to use them properly, but I just wanted to try and have them as a utility piece rather than this, glass cannon missile that you send at someone. And up there is my Waste Stalker. So my strategy here, before I knew I was going second, was to make sure I could clear the chaff and make sure I was far enough away from the magic missiles. He, on turn one, ends up moving the Skinwolves up and casting Arcade Urgency. Turn one, the end of it, they end up here. So I don't know how defensively you can deploy to avoid that threat. But regardless, I think I did what I could to stop it. He still had to cast Arcane Urgency. So I made him, force that issue. Now, when looking at this list, and any list I play against, I always, as I said at the start, you have to figure out how you can win. For me, I need to clear, and this is pretty much against every army I play with Wood Elves, clear the fast and the ranged threats. So for me, even though they're dogs can kill toughness 3. So I have to kill them. Marauders, less of a threat. They were frenzied with flails, but get them out of the way, not even second priority. Skinwolves, I would have loved to deal with early, but they're tough to deal with early because they're quick and they get into combat, and that's hard for me to shoot them. This giant spawn is tough as, and random movement 3d6 means I don't get a charge reaction, which means I can't flee or stand and shoot or anything like that, which takes one of my strategies out, which is key to Wood Elves. So I had to bring that down. If I could bring down the chaff and one of these 2 units here, I was in good shape to then take out this block, which had the level 4 in it. He has some some Dragon Ogres in there, which they're quite slow. They don't have Swift Stride, so my strategy was to ignore them. They eventually get into combat, but they were my ignore piece. As I said, I tried to bait these guys out of there. So really, I'm trying to kill this segment here, and hopefully I lose less points than him. Again, there'll be a battle report out about this shortly, so if you're interested in that, please watch along. The next photo I want to show you is from a game I played against Mike, another friend of the pod. This was a test match of, I think it's Meeting Engagement or Battle for the Pass. I forget which one it is. The one where you deploy on the long sides of the boards. He's playing Empire. He has some Inner Circle Knights, a General and a Griffin, a ginormous block of handgunners, 2 mortars, and some Outriders. So again, not knowing if I'm going first or second, I go second again in this in this one. I always deploy as if I'm going second. The threats for me here is this block of handgunners, the General, who I know that Mike deploys defensively, and he's going to deploy defensively against a list like this. The Outriders can do some damage with the right dice rolling. These guys, the Inner Circle Knights, are fast enough to get an annoying charge off for me. So the mortars, I don't rate them. Mike loves them. God bless him. But the indirect fire is a real hamstringing factor for them. So I wasn't too worried about them. But at the same time, you can see here, I've managed to get some Deepwood Scouts behind his enemy lines. That plays a massive role in just getting in his head and thinking about, does he have to go back and deal with it? Or should he just press on and sacrifice these things? For me, again, you can see this list is a little bit different, but I've got a Battle Standard Bearer on a Great Stag there, a Tree Man, 2 unit of Glade Guard, a Glade Rider Bus with a level 2, a Great Eagle, Vanguard Bannered Wild Riders, a level 4, and Sisters. These guys, the Wild Riders, are just, I wanted to see what they could do to this block here. So I was always putting them in the middle. Eagle, you can see I've hidden behind a tree. Some buildings, so it can't get shot by anything. The Glade Guard, who are by all means chaff, are deployed at the edge of a forest. So if he decides that he's cutting his losses and coming up here to deal with something, and he marches something up here, I can just move them out of the forest. He can no longer see me. The Tree Men and the BSB are there then to deal with any threats who get into the back lines. The Sisters are open order, fast cavalry, very maneuverable with Swift Stride. They're just an incredible unit, so I wasn't too worried about them. And they can always fire and flee, and I can just throw my BSB at whatever's coming their way. So, and then down at the bottom here, my Glade Riders are deployed far enough away from these Outriders, so if he moves, he still can't shoot them. I forget their range, I think it's 24. So they would have been 33 inches away or so, or whatever their movement is, plus their shooting range. So that if I go second, he can't move and shoot them. If I go first, I move up and I shoot them. Happy days. But I don't want to take those losses first turn. So there you go. There's a few examples of how you can deploy defensively to work it into your favor using things like terrain and the map itself and just distances. Distance is your best friend when you're trying to deploy defensively. If you can abuse that for a couple of turns, then, as I said, you get to turn the game back into your favor. Where for an army like Wood Elves, that is how my game, I need turn 5 and turn 6 to seal the deal. So I'm now just 100% defensive deployment. If you can see me on turn 1, I've stuffed up. So hope that's helpful for anyone who's made it this far. Thank you very much. Again, like, comment, subscribe. Goes a long way for us. So yeah, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.